When I turned the key in the lock that afternoon, the hollow click echoed through the empty house like a warning I wasn't ready for. I stepped inside, expecting the familiar hum of home, the soft comfort of my couch, the subtle aroma of brewed coffee lingering from the morning. Instead, every room stared back at me bare, stripped clean. The sofa was gone, the TV nowhere in sight, my kitchen table vanished. Even the silverware my grandmother had handed down through generations had disappeared. I froze at the threshold of the kitchen and noticed a small folded note lying on the counter. Familiar handwriting I never wanted to see in this context again. My brother Khalil. I sank onto the cold wooden floor, the silence pressing down like a physical weight. The words were simple, almost casual, but they cut deeper than any argument we'd ever had. We took what we deserved. Don't call us. The phrase echoed in my mind, twisting memories of family dinners and birthday celebrations into sharp fragments. Khalil and his wife, Marvet, the only two people besides me who held a key, had taken everything. Every chair, every painting, every trace of the life I had carefully built. And just like that, my home, my sanctuary, was gone, leaving nothing but the emptiness of betrayal. I felt a mix of shock, disbelief, and a hollow ache that pulsed from my chest to my fingertips. Blood against blood. How could someone I had protected, supported, and loved turn so easily? The thought that family could wield such quiet cruelty made the walls seem colder, the air heavier. I traced the edges of the note with trembling fingers, as if touching it could somehow erase the reality of their absence. But nothing could. I thought of the weekends spent babysitting Khalil when our parents were gone, the money I lent without question, the silent sacrifices I had made to make sure he never had to struggle. Marvet had always seemed sweet, almost sisterly, until now. I had welcomed her, shared meals, laughed with them, never imagining that this trust would be their weapon. And yet, here it was, my home emptied, my belongings stolen, a single note mocking the loyalty I had once given without hesitation. Sitting there, staring at the bare floorboards, I realized the betrayal wasn't just material. It was intimate, personal, a violation of the kind of trust only family could hold. Every familiar corner, every memory etched into the walls, now felt like a stranger's claim. And beneath the grief, beneath the anger, a small, stubborn ember began to glow, one that whispered I wouldn't let this go unanswered. This was just the beginning, and I knew I had to find a way to confront the family I once thought I could trust with everything. Growing up in Birmingham, Alabama, Khalil and I had a life that was far from easy. After Mom and Dad passed, I carried the weight of keeping us afloat, juggling 2 jobs just to make sure he had what he needed for school, clothes, and even the small comforts we clung to. I never thought twice about the sacrifices. I was family, and family meant putting someone else's needs above your own. When Khalil introduced Marvet, I welcomed her with open arms. She laughed easily, fit into our routines, and for a while, I genuinely thought we had gained a new sister. But the dynamic shifted over time. Requests for help became constant. Rent payments, car repairs, bills that just needed covering. Each one framed as temporary, urgent, necessary. I said yes every single time. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about loyalty, about being the sister who never turned her back. Only now, standing in a house emptied of everything I had worked for, I see the cost of that loyalty. My willingness to give, to trust, to protect, had blinded me to the growing sense of entitlement in Khalil and Marvet. I had built a foundation of support, and they had used it to their advantage without a second thought. Blood, I realized, could be as cruel as any stranger when greed eclipsed gratitude. My devotion, meant to safeguard family, had become the lens through which I was deceived, a shield that hid their intentions until it was too late. I went to the police station that afternoon, hoping for some acknowledgement, a way to make sense of what had happened. I explained the situation calmly, listing the missing items, the note, and the obvious signs that my brother and his wife had taken advantage of my trust. The officer listened, nodding politely, then delivered a line I wasn't prepared for. Since Khalil had a key, it was a family matter. No forms, no investigation, just the shrug of official disinterest. I left feeling invisible, as though my grief and shock didn't even register. Back at home, I sat at my laptop, still numb, and logged into my account. My stomach sank when I saw multiple unauthorized withdrawals, transfers I had never approved, purchases I didn't recognize. Khalil had used my banking information, accessing the life I had built piece by piece. Every transaction felt like a punch, each number a reminder that he had crossed a line I never imagined. The hurt settled deep, heavier than I expected. It wasn't just money or possessions, it was the betrayal itself, a raw, physical ache that throbbed in my chest. I ran my hands over my face, trying to breathe past the shock, and for the first time, the anger beneath the pain sharpened into clarity. This wasn't something I could ignore, forgive, or wish away. I realized then that grief alone wouldn't carry me through. It had to become fuel. Determination sparked inside me, quiet but unyielding, signaling that the next step would be about reclaiming not only what was stolen, but the respect and dignity they thought they could strip from me. I unfolded the note again, turning it over in my hands as if its edges could reveal a secret I had missed. My eyes landed on the words, "We took what we deserved," and something in my chest tightened. The phrase wasn't random. It was one Dad used often in quiet, reflective moments, like a warning wrapped in advice. Suddenly, memories I had buried resurfaced. The reading of his will, his deliberate choice to leave the house and savings solely to me, and the way Khalil had smiled politely while his eyes betrayed a simmering resentment. It had always been there, that undercurrent of jealousy he masked with jokes and easy charm. The subtle digs that left me questioning whether I had overstepped or misunderstood. But now, staring at the note, the pieces clicked into place. This wasn't impulsive. It wasn't just greed. It was carefully calculated, a message delivered through action rather than words. The theft was Khalil's way of finally addressing the years of perceived injustice, claiming what he felt had been denied to him all along. I felt a cold clarity settle over me. The sister who had forgave too quickly, who excused behavior for the sake of family harmony, who carried the burden of loyalty without hesitation, she was gone. There was no room left for naive compassion or misplaced trust. For the first time, I allowed myself to see the full weight of the betrayal, to acknowledge that some bonds, even of blood, could be broken beyond repair. This note wasn't just a declaration, it was a turning point. I folded it carefully, setting it aside, and made a silent vow. I would no longer be the forgiving sister. I sifted through the remnants left behind, tossing aside empty boxes and discarded papers, until a small, crumpled slip caught my attention beneath the doormat. It was a rental receipt, faintly stamped with a location and a date, tied to a storage unit. My pulse quickened as I realized this could be the trail I needed, the first tangible sign of where everything had gone. I tucked it into my pocket and waited until darkness settled over the neighborhood before I drove out, headlights cutting through the quiet streets. When I arrived at the address, a modest house tucked between larger homes, I could see through the windows into a room that made my chest ache. There it all was, my living room set, the artwork I had collected over years, even my grandmother's quilt folded neatly on the couch. Every piece of my life was there, untouched yet taunting me. I didn't ring the bell. I didn't knock. I simply watched, taking in the scene, memorizing every detail, recording the proof in my mind and with my phone. I felt a mixture of rage and resolve simmering inside me, a clarity I hadn't experienced since discovering the empty house. I whispered under my breath, almost as if to steel myself, "Fine. You want war? You've got one." And in that moment, every ounce of hurt transformed into a plan. I knew what I had to do next, and there was no turning back. This was no longer about loss. It was about reclaiming what was mine and showing them the consequences of underestimating me. I reached out to Desmond, someone I'd known since college, because legal muscle felt like the only sensible bridge between my raw outrage and something that might actually fix it. He agreed to the meeting without drama, and when I laid out the situation, he didn't try to soothe me or hand me platitudes. He asked practical questions, the kind that cut through emotion and exposed the facts. He warned up front that disputes among relatives often land in a gray zone where proof matters more than story. But he also promised to push wherever the paperwork allowed. Over the next week we moved with a quiet, almost clinical focus. I pulled together purchase records, warranty cards, and the faded tags that proved ownership. I scrolled bank histories until my eyes blurred, cataloging transfers and charges that didn't belong to me. Small items that had always seemed trivial suddenly carried weight. A chipped vase with a hairline crack, a brass key with an initial stamped on it. Desmond taught me how to capture metadata, how to back up screenshots so timestamps couldn't be denied, and how to request footage from neighbors' door cameras without stirring alarm. The accumulation of details began to feel like building a map, one that pointed directly to them. He pushed for restraint in public. No angry posts, no confrontations over coffee, no impulsive phone calls. "Credibility is everything," he said, eyes steady. Lose it and the rest unravels. I fought the urge to broadcast everything, to let fury be my witness, and instead practiced quiet patience. When I spoke with community members, I was measured, precise. When I took statements, I recorded facts and refused to indulge gossip. That discipline became its own kind of power, reshaping my adrenaline into something useful. At home, I turned the smallest details into anchors for the case. I photographed the empty spaces where cherished objects had been, noted scuffs on floors that matched the furniture we'd lost, and wrote descriptions so specific no one could claim confusion. My grandmother's quilt, with its mismatched patches and one corner mended poorly, was listed with measurements and the names stitched into the binding. Each entry felt like reconstructing not only possessions but the narrative of my life that had been disrupted. Desmond warned about collateral damage. He spoke plainly about how combative moves could fracture relationships beyond repair and about the emotional toll litigation carries. He asked whether I was prepared for the scrutiny, for relatives to pick sides, for memories to be re-examined under a microscope. I didn't gloss over the cost. I only said that allowing the theft to stand felt worse than the fight. He nodded, then drafted demand letters, prepared records requests, and organized the exhibits into folders that felt heavier than their weight in paper. Working through the documents became a ritual that steadied me. Where grief had once swelled unpredictably, process now occupied the space. Each subpoena filed, each recorded statement added, tightened a framework that promised accountability. Desmond checked in often, reminding me to eat, to sleep, to step outside air. I replied rarely with anything more than assurance. Inside, a fierce resolution grew noiselessly into purpose. I was ready to reclaim what they'd taken and restore my life again. A month passed in quiet vigilance before my phone rang. Khalil's voice on the other end was light, casual, almost rehearsed. "We should talk, Amara. Family doesn't stay mad forever." I listened carefully, measuring every inflection, every hesitation, knowing this was part performance, part test. I agreed to meet him at a small cafe in Montgomery, choosing the table near the corner where the conversation could be recorded without detection. Every detail mattered now. When he arrived, his charm was on full display. He smiled, joked, leaned in as if nothing had happened. He tried to shift blame, claiming Marvette had pushed him into decisions, that he hadn't meant to take so much. I let him talk, nodding at the right moments, asking soft questions that encouraged him to reveal more. And that's when he slipped, mentioning an item, a placement, a detail only someone who had handled the stolen possessions would know. The proof was quietly spilling from his own mouth. I maintained calm, my voice even and warm, hiding every trace of anger. I let him think he controlled the narrative, that I was still the forgiving sister. Meanwhile, outside, Desmond waited in the car, folders of evidence stacked neatly, ready to act the moment I gave the signal. I could feel the tension radiating off Khalil as he spoke faster, his movements sharper, small tells betraying unease. Silence became my weapon. I didn't need to shout, accuse, or berate. My quiet composure, paired with the knowledge of the evidence waiting just beyond the door, unsettled him more than any outburst could have. Every word he spoke was catalogued, every hesitation noted, and as I sipped my coffee, I understood that control had shifted. He thought he was charming me back into forgiveness, but in reality, he had stepped into the trap I had laid, and he didn't even know it yet. The day of the hearing arrived with a quiet intensity that set my nerves on edge. Walking into the courthouse, I felt the weight of anticipation settle over me, a mix of dread and resolve. Khalil and Marvette were already there, leaning casually against the bench, smirks plastered across their faces, as if my presence was a mere formality and the outcome predetermined. They had expected hesitation, weakness, or perhaps an easy reconciliation, but they hadn't accounted for preparation. Desmond guided me through the process, his calm demeanor a steady anchor. When it was time to present our case, we laid everything out meticulously. My folder was thick with evidence, detailed timestamps marking the transfers, surveillance footage capturing them entering and leaving my property, signed banking forms showing unauthorized withdrawals, and receipts proving ownership of nearly every item they had taken. Each document was organized, clear, undeniable. Desmond's questioning and presentation framed the facts logically, leaving no room for doubt. As the judge reviewed the files and listened to the arguments, I watched Khalil's confidence begin to waver. His smile faltered as the weight of our preparation pressed down on him. Marvette shifted uneasily in her seat, eyes darting between the judge and the evidence. When the ruling came, The courtroom held its breath. Restitution of my property, reimbursement of damages, and an order transferring everything back to me. The gavel struck, final and decisive, and the room fell silent. Khalil's face drained of color as the reality sank in. He had assumed he could manipulate the system, intimidate me, or rely on familial bonds to shield him. Instead, he was outmaneuvered, cornered by patience, diligence, and a commitment to justice. I felt a quiet satisfaction, not triumphant or vengeful, but steady and vindicated. For the first time since the theft, control was entirely in my hands, and the weight of that power was both intoxicating and liberating. I parked outside the house just before dusk, the sky muted in shades of gray, and took a deep breath before stepping onto the walkway. The door opened slowly, and Khalil appeared, his face pale and drawn, the bravado he usually carried nowhere in sight. Marvette lingered behind him, avoiding eye contact, her hands twisting nervously. I didn't pause to exchange words. I stepped inside, each footfall deliberate, feeling the space as mine again, reclaiming what had been taken. Room by room, I gathered my things. The couch, once a centerpiece of Sunday mornings and quiet evenings, now returned to my possession. My grandmother's quilt, folded carefully, reminded me of the hands that had stitched our history into fabric. Each item restored a sense of self I hadn't realized had been chipped away with every theft, every betrayal. I moved with purpose, cataloging each piece mentally and securing it for the journey home. Marvette finally spoke, a quiet, hesitant apology that fell short of the weight of what had been done. I looked at her without anger, only measured resolve. "Sorry doesn't rebuild trust," I said, my voice steady, letting the words hang in the air as both judgment and boundary. No explanation, no argument. I didn't need to justify the years of wrongs. My actions now were sufficient. With the last box loaded, I walked to the door, shut it firmly behind me, and felt the release of closing that chapter. I didn't glance back. The house, once a symbol of loss and violation, now remained behind me as a marker of survival and reclamation. The drive home felt lighter, as though the air itself had shifted, carrying with it the quiet triumph of taking back not just objects, but dignity and control over my own life. The first morning in my new apartment felt different, almost surreal. Sunlight spilled across the floors, warm and steady, touching surfaces that were entirely mine. The space was smaller than what I had left behind, but there was a freedom in the simplicity, a quiet that allowed me to breathe without memories crowding every corner. I arranged the essentials, unpacked slowly, and left one corner deliberately bare, a reminder of the emptiness I had faced and the resilience that had carried me forward. Boxes stacked in neat piles marked the effort of reclaiming my life, each one a tangible victory over what had been lost. The apartment smelled faintly of paint and clean air, a freshness I hadn't realized I craved. It was a home that belonged to me alone, and the sense of control, of autonomy, settled into my chest like a soft weight. I moved through the rooms deliberately, letting the sunlight illuminate the progress of starting over, letting the quiet remind me that nothing taken could erase my strength. A letter arrived in the mailbox one afternoon, its envelope familiar. I recognized Khalil's handwriting immediately. I didn't open it. The temptation to see what excuses or manipulations he might have penned barely registered against the clarity of my resolve. Without a second thought, I dropped it into the trash, letting it fall among the remnants of the past. It didn't belong here. I sank onto the couch, feeling the fabric beneath me, and exhaled slowly, finally letting the tension in my shoulders ease. I whispered softly, almost to myself, "Peace tastes better than revenge ever could." There was no need for triumph, no need for dramatic gestures or vindictive satisfaction. The loss, the betrayal, the struggle, all of it had led me here, to a calm I hadn't thought possible. This was not the end of a battle, but the beginning of a life reclaimed, one that was entirely, unequivocally mine. I finally closed that chapter of my life and started fresh, but I keep wondering, was cutting ties with Khalil and Marvette the right move, or could I have forgiven and tried again? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Share what you would do, and if you want more stories like mine, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single one.